I believe the time might be right for a nice little refreshing slap in the face. It's going to start out saying like that I am talking about me, but as you people should know, that's not the point. But I'm going to go ahead and do it because many of you find yourself, or we'll assume all of you, being in the position where you are because of me. So, by the way, it mentions, or your own observations, how it is so common in all sorts of philosophical, religious, and apparent mystical traditions of people attempting not to talk about themselves, and gets into crude versions of humility and religion. But let me just point to you point blank. Anybody that understands anything, it's no effort not to talk about yourself. None whatsoever. None. It doesn't require any effort. On the contrary, that's why I'm prefacing it to begin with. That it almost makes you want to comb your tongue to even say anything about yourself. And by the way, there is a reason, in case you've never pursued it on your own, besides ordinary people's conception of the gods don't want you to try and aspire to their greatness and therefore you should be humble and etc. I'll tell you what it is. It is that every time you say I, and you even to yourself, is what you're doing is reinforcing a feeling of separateness from life, which is the antithesis of what the mystical experience is. And it just reinforces it. For ordinary people, it is a moot point. In fact, it is necessary at the ordinary level. But the reason that those who understood something and had that kind of extended, illuminating, conscious experience end up not talking about themselves is, even if they didn't explain it to anyone, is the fact that it reinforces a feeling of separateness. And it tends to keep one continually commenting upon life. Because every time you say I, you're commenting on life. Every time you do it, your own awareness is separating you again between your playing into my equation of I plus not I equals everything. Whereas the mystical experience, there is no such equation. Or if there is, the equation goes everything plus everything equals everything. Or everything plus not everything equals everything. All of the mystical, secret, work, enlightened traditions throughout history are all faced with, or from your view, you should see that you're faced with two possibilities. Someone can either tell you about the adventure they've experienced or tell you about someone else's. Which brings us back again to the fact that there are two kinds of mystical systems and mystical work going on in the world. Always have been. The kind you heard about and the kind you haven't heard about. The kind you've heard about is the latter group, as they tell you about someone else's. It's a system based upon whoever they select. The secret teachings of Buddha, the secret teachings of Confucius. But it's always based upon someone else's experience. The real mystics only can tell you, or only would tell you, about their own adventure, about what they have experienced. But this brings about certain aspects for which people who even pursue this in all sincerity and with some theoretical background, for which they're not prepared. Because mystics, ordinarily, using the word just as loosely as you want to start with, mystics ordinarily want an audience. They want a following the same way as jugglers, comedians, dancers, poets, alpha male wolves. You cannot have a pack. How are you going to be the head wolf unless you've got some lesser wolves to submit and follow along? Ordinary people believe that there's a great distinction between man, and ordinary people would certainly think there's a great distinction between philosophers or religious prophets or mystics and their followers, that there would be a distinct almost indescribable difference between that sort of arrangement and wolves and the head wolf. Mystics know better. But an ordinary mystic, keeping it loose to start with, they start out wanting an audience. It is simply the nature of life, the nature of polarized existence here, that it takes people to dance, and that you do not live in isolation. So in the same way, there is not that big a distinction to start with of somebody who wants to play guitar, somebody who wants to sing, somebody who wants to be a comedian. You do know by now that they would not pursue it without an audience. Or if you want to look at it another way, the reason they are pursuing it, the reason they dream of doing it, is to have an audience, which is the same thing as a following. It seems to be different, that an audience can come and go and you pay your money, but it's the same thing. Once, let's say, a mystically inclined person who is more of the alpha male wolf type, he is simply genetically more overbearing. He is not going to follow anybody. And he gets out and he howls a little bit, and he howls about Buddhism or Zen or the Fourth Way or the Kabbalah. He howls something about mysticism. And sure enough, some people show up. They're going, yes, I'm interested. If this is going to go any further, if there's going to be any sort of systematic effort involved after this, then the people who show up, again, ordinary minds do not like to consider this for some reason, but those who show up and stay there want to submit. If they were not doing that, they would be submitting to something else. If they joined anything, they would not be leading a pack, they join in, because look around in life, somewhere way over 95% of everyone are followers. They're not the leaders of the pack. I refer you back, although it was on a different subject, about what history seems to be, that only a handful of people. And it's not a matter of qualitative judgment that some people are better than others, because if you believe that, then you would look down and say, well, one wolf is better than the other, which gets dangerous, because normally the wolf is bigger, meaner, more aggressive. But then if you move that just one iota closer to the human experience, then you've got to attribute some intelligence to the wolf and say he's smarter, which we won't go into. No sense in people getting the blues and depressed when you're only 10 minutes into it. For there to be, let's just make it simple, what apparently is some sort of mystical group, that you've got them somewhere. They're always popping around, they're in history, and they're going on right now in every city that's getting these tapes. In the Western world, there's scores, I'm sure, of apparent would-be or apparent mystical groups. They call themselves mystical groups. And you just look in the New Age section of your newspaper or some local magazine, and they'll be there from Zen, Fourth Way groups, meditation. You know the scores that they go through. And if it is any sort of group that has any longevity, that seems to be holding together, there's going to be some leader. When it gets in the human realm, they normally refer to him as charismatic of some sort. He is going to be overbearing compared to the rest of them. He will be the leader of a pack, looking for a pack. And if those that show up stick around, they want to submit. And there is nothing inherently questionable or untoward about this. It's the nature of life. But when it gets beyond just the physical level of a wolf pack, then the human mind works in such a way that the submission has to turn into, or begins to circle around, either fear or reverence of the leader. Now, just at the physical level of a wolf pack, to attribute or to use human terms, those that submit, those that stay in, the pack and assume their natural submissive position somewhere in the hierarchy of the wolves, you can say that they fear the wolf, the head wolf, the alpha male, as they're calling them. But into the human realm, it doesn't have to be that the would-be apparent mystical leader, the guy leading meditations, or some New Jersey form of a Zen monk or an Indian yogi. They do not have to necessarily physically fear him, but if they join up and they seem to like the story or seem to like the arrangement that when they show up for a meeting, if they do stay, then the submission does not have to turn on actual fear of the leader. It turns into what is normally referred to as reverence, which, before this is over, if you can't do it yourself, I would submit to you, a good mystic can see that the difference between the two is not worth spitting on. But at the human level, you cannot simply call it that. It does not work. You cannot say that people remain part of the Catholic Church because they're afraid of the Pope. Jumping to a wild, removed example, just so that you don't get too hung up on the specifics to start with, because people would say, well, I'm not a Catholic just because of the Pope, or especially this Pope, because I was a Catholic before he was Pope. And so then they would say, and I certainly would not stay a member of this church because of fear if I feared him. But I do revere him. I revere him for what he stands for. And then when it gets out of the wider public realm of religious institutions into what appears to be mystical groups and traditions, then of course you're talking about some small group number of people, just scores, usually less than 100. But at any rate, a small group of people. And that would then be much more possible for them to fear it, especially if they retreated to a commune or they built them a little house and the leader took the X number of people that said that they were that dedicated to whatever they thought he represented or knew. There could be apparently a form of fear, which I point out to you is the public's retelling. It's one way that they're able to explain some of this is, well, when things go awry, then the public says, life makes the folks say, well, the people were probably honest, decent folks, but they fell in with this charismatic leader, and it got out of hand. They turned over their lives too much to him, and it just absolutely went insane. They considered that he was too holy. They just went nuts. This arrangement has got to be there basically for anything to hold together. And I'm not going to spend our time tonight, since I was trying to get more into your spiritual face, your conscious face. It's the same with political parties. It's the same with almost any organization. It's just the way humans congregate. But it seems to be specifically of a different level, at least marching at a different tempo, when it's into areas normally thought of as the occult or the New Age or the mystical. But for this group, once it starts, and we have this leader, a man who says, in some way or the other, before I get into which one, that gets out and howls, and the howl has something to do with mysticism. And some other wolves show up, some other people, and they go, rah, 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 and they go, and they go, rah, 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 and they go, and then he says something like, well, we'll start meeting every Monday, or we'll take up a collection, we'll go buy us a little hut out in the woods, and we'll go out there. They go, rah, 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 and they go, yes. It goes into not just showing up for a meeting, not just showing up for some introductory lecture that the head wolf mystic makes, but then they submit. Whether they call it that or not, you just simply submit. You submit if you go join a political party. You submit if you go join a publicly recognized and honored church. So you have to submit. Then for the group to hold together, to be a little more specifically, there must be 5 or 6. There's a handful of things must take place. They have got to have a kind of fear/reverence for what they assume the leader represents, or his attributes, what they read into it, whether he claims it outright or not. There then has to be a way in which they feel as though they have distinguished themselves from non-participants. Normally a name, you've got to have a name that they say, well, this is New Age, Western, Zen, maybe a guy says. there has to be an identifying verbiage so that they feel that, all right, if I show up here, I am in some way distinguished from those not showing up. And just the physical experience of you being here and then turn around and your neighbor, your husband, your wife, your brother-in-law is not here, that is not sufficient distinction between you and non-participants. You show up for this mystical meeting, or he says, all right, everyone's going to have to turn in all your money so we can go buy us a place and get out of the clutches of normal civilization. Even that's not enough. There has to be a name so that somebody to themselves, to each other, but at least so that they can say to themselves, well, I am a Sufi and my brother's not, or I am a Western neo-Zen follower and my next door neighbor is not. There has to be that. There has to be, since we're all verbal creatures now, there has to be some teaching, some doctrine. There has to be an aim stated. There has to be methods presented, tasks, methods, rituals that are claimed to lead to the aim, to effect enough change in you to make the aim realizable. And then at the end of all this, there is normally, this just happens and no one takes it into account, but I'll point out to you, there is also normally guilt. Insofar as no matter who picks out, no matter what the group is that comes up with the methods, the rituals, to apparently affect enough change in you to affect your consciousness, to lead to some higher state, the aim is not routinely possible. The methods routinely do not work, or they do not work in your lifetime. And therefore, there is always the matter of guilt. Now, getting to you and I, and I'm going to have to say I and you, but I'm interested in you, not me. As you understand, those of you, I know we've got people that in other cities, they're showing up to watch the private viewings of these tapes. They're still doing it in some of the other cities, because at the rate I'm doing them, as far as them being shown publicly or on cable, unless you live in some hyper time zone, they'll never catch up, because in all the cities I know, going on now 30 or 40, it's once a week, and we're doing 3 a week. So we have people meeting in other cities that in some way consider, I'm sure now, that they are a part of whatever this is. If I really pushed it to some of the people I've never met in these other cities, they've been showing up for X amount of months or years watching the tapes, and I've never met them. If I made them in some way, if I insisted they offer some sort of kind of allegiance, like would at least write and tell me that you enjoy this and that you want me to continue doing it, and that you find that it fits into your needs, and I'm just trying to make it vague so that you're not just hit with it point blank. That is, I don't have to write them all and say, listen, you got to swear that you'd give me your firstborn and give me all your money if I ask for it. I could do that. And there would be people who would say yes. They would want to say yes. But the position you're in, it would be difficult for them to say yes because of everything that I just named that's required to hold a mystical group together. Am I wrong, or is each and every one of them lacking here? Got no name for it. Got a name for the show, and I'll let you guys pick it out. Doctrine or teaching. I mean, you could call it that. You could say, well, you're doing it every night. Are you going to put it down? Can you make some kind of doctrine out of this? Could you even outline it? Insofar as specific tasks and methods, I've mentioned things along the way, but when I say a task or method, it has to become an integral part. One of the modern versions of one of the older ones, as you probably know, is there are groups of different forms of would-be Sufis now in the West that, after they state the aim is to awaken from a sleep. And the method is to remember oneself. And no matter what you say, if you want to go join up the group, or you listen to some lecture or something attracted you to some organization. And you say, well, I like the idea, I can understand it when you people describe that we're living in sort of a dazed condition, almost living in a dream world, and we could awaken. How do I do it? So they say, you have got to, instead of letting your consciousness and your awareness just wander off, and you forget that you're actually here. You're getting tied up with what life is driving you to do, with greed and etc. You have got to, in the Western, one of the versions they're using now, remember yourself. And that strikes many people. It always has, because it's based upon what the heart, at least of the trip toward the adventure, has always been a kind of mindfulness, a kind of holding of attention, but a kind of mindfulness is what they all amount to. From Zen to Christianity to all the various forms of Buddhism to every mystical system that you ever heard of. The method is always, the intent is always a kind of mindfulness. And it's been called everything from being mindful continually of God, to being mindful that you are part of the universe, to being mindful of yourself. And it could be even sillier things, which sometimes I throw in. It being forever mindful of rutabagas. As long as you've got a specific aim or a method such as that, there has to be, you have got the trailing kind of guilt, and you feel as though you need the organization. Not because it's conspiracy, because those who set up such organizations, I assure you, do not know any more than the followers do. Well, operationally speaking, there's no great difference. And so I don't mean it's conspiracy, but it is necessary that there be the ones I mentioned, but that there be methods, that you hear the idea. And this could be true of a church, a recognized religion. If they say, well, the point is we want to repay our sins, or the error our forefathers have made to the gods, so that when we die, we will go back to the union, back to a happy relationship with God. And you think, well, that sounds good to me. I can't find any fault with that. And you say, well, how do you do it? And they say, besides, the simplest way, always has been and still remains, is simply to publicly convert, to change your name in a sense, to stamp, say, I am now not just John Smith or Mary Smith, I am now John Smith, Episcopalian. And you stand in front of the other groups of Episcopalians, you put your hand on the Bible, or they do a little ritual of sprinkling water, or they do something, that you can now distinguish yourself from non-Episcopalians. You can even distinguish yourself from John Smith, pre-Episcopalian. But if you've got any desire beyond just the social level of religion, that is, if you've got any inkling, if any stirrings of wanting to be a mystic and to get something out of religion, then very shortly you'll want more than that. And you'll say, well, what can I do? I do not feel that close to God. Do I have to wait till I die before I'm back in the graces of the universe? For it to hold together and to approach being a real mystical group, there has to be something to do. And it gets into various gradations of it that I won't go through them all, but then it can move up to small rituals such as, well, come to Mass every day. Light candles when you come to Mass. Kneel, do a rosary, do this and that. And so that seems to do a little something. And that's about as far, that's a little bit, you could say a little bit more complex, a little more involved for the participants than just standing up saying, yes, I agree to all the teachings of the Episcopal Church and I'm now Episcopalian, and they all shake hands, and that's sort of it. After that, it's more or less just another social activity. And then you can move into there being some rituals. Those who would be mystics, they may go through some of this, but very shortly they discover that the rituals do not do it to what little is required. Then they want something else. And that's when it gets into such things as always remember yourself, or be ever mindful, or be mindful forever of each breath you take. Then it seems as though, rightfully so, that you're getting closer to the path. Because now it is not something that you simply go out and do ritualistically in a group. That it's something that you can do. That they say you must be ever mindful. You must never forget that you exist no matter what else is running through your body, no matter what physical sensations, no matter what emotional feelings you have, no matter what's going on in your mind, no matter the internal chatter. right now, don't worry about that, may say the mystical leader to a small group. But what you must do is have some focus, like this big lighthouse, just standing there in all the waves, crashing against it, all the waves of the outside stimuli, and that which apparently arises within you, the internal chatter, the continual comment, that there must be something in you that's standing steady. And it always, some description, I can make them up, but for would-be mystics throughout history, that always, whatever language and whatever particular example, that strikes them, because it's based upon the truth. It's based upon the nature of man. But once you have given out some specific method, then, back to the smaller context of a mystical group somewhere, and they say, the point is you must be ever mindful that you exist. You must always remember yourself, that you are here, just objectively, that you are here no matter what else is going on outside of you and no matter what's flowing through you. After that, you can go back to the leader, no matter what kind of setbacks you have, whatever's going on, and say, well, I don't seem to be getting anywhere. For a while I think I'm getting somewhere, and then I get very angry. I find out, I get the sensation that I be out talking about myself. It just eludes me, and it seems to encourage this kind of out-of-control internal awareness if I talk about me. And the leader goes, yeah. And he goes, well, what did I do? He says, well, let me ask you this. Were you remembering yourself the last time this happened? And again, it's appearing that assuming you're as sincere as you can be, the answer is going to be no. If you give him an example, if you say, I felt like the time I've spent here is just, my whole life has changed. And then I feel like I'm going along and I feel like I'm getting so close, I can almost taste some kind of awakening, if they're using that term. And he'll say, and then something will happen. I haven't seen my first wife, I haven't seen my brother, we haven't spoken in years. And he called me today. And I was sort of glad to hear from him, but then he said something, he brought up something in the past. And suddenly, my mind went completely out of control. I might as well have been some sort of a comet that went out of its or planted out of its proper orbit. I just went absolutely insane internally. That it was as though the last X number of years I spent here studying with you, it's like it just all went bluey. And he says, what? What have I done wrong? How could this happen to me? And the mystical leader says, well, answer me this one question. Were you being mindful, you remembering that you exist, were you self-remembering at the moment that happened? And if the man has any nervous system wherewithal, any mental wherewithal, and any sincerity, you have to go, well, no, I was not. And you can even push it and make them feel guiltier. Under the guise of trying to help, you can say, well, can you even remember can you remember anything going on internally in you during this? Maybe you tell them that when your brother called, you ended up on the phone with him, the best you can figure, an hour. And that was this afternoon, before you came to see the mystical leader. And you say, and he says, well, can you, once you remember that he started talking about the original conflict that set you two apart all these years, yeah? After that, can you remember anything going on? Can you remember anything you thought about? What time was that? And you said, about 2 o'clock. And the guy says, all right, it's 8 o'clock now. Can you actually say, now you've already admitted that you weren't remembering that you exist when that happened. Oh, and you say, oh yeah, there's no doubt, the whole thing went. And he could even say, well, can you remember anything you thought since then? And if he was really good, he might say, can you remember anything you thought since then, except perhaps replaying 1 or 2 things he said, some sentence he said. And again, if you had some intellectual powers, you would go, no, you're right. I might as well, you're right, for the last 6 hours, I might as well have been living, or internally living in me, might as well have been some kind of whirlwind, some sort of just tornado, and I know that up here, I was there. And you say, but you might as well have been a stranger. You don't know what you were thinking, you don't know what you were doing. You go, yeah. And so then he can say, well, there it is. What have I told you when you first came here? I said the whole point. And of course, he's going to be attributing it. You got to remember, he's not telling you his adventure. He's telling you somebody else's. And so he'll refer, not just to himself, as one way that you pass off ignorance as humility, is he would say, well, now look at dear Buddha. How many times did he say this? Or look at Sufi so-and-so, or look at Yogi so-and-so. Here it is, 2,000 years ago, 50 years ago, they said that same thing, that you cannot expect any awakening, you cannot expect anything better to happen in your life if you forget that you exist. And you had already bought into this, you had already joined up. I don't mean bought in a negative sense. You had already joined up this group years ago, because when you heard the descriptions, when you heard the methods, as soon as you heard it, you went, ah. And so now it seems as though you have fallen off an edge, or that you've gone backwards, or the whole thing has been a waste of time. And you say, well, what happened? They say, well, I got to refer you back to the beginning. Can you tell me that today you consider to be a major setback? You consider that now that maybe a hole has opened up in all of this effort, that you are beginning to wonder if you have even made the right decision. At that time, will you remembering yourself? And you go, no. And I'm not being funny, because in a sense, it is the answer. But now notice this. Back to the position that some of you, or that all of you will say, find yourself in because of me. Besides mentioning things here and there is no ritual to this. There is no tradition I've offered. There is no method. There is nothing I tell you. I say things that you're never going to change your level of consciousness. You'll never have anything that's been called the enlightenment. You'll never reach Buddhahood unless you have some control over consciousness. But that's an idea you've got to remember. That's a path. That is not the experience. And there are people who have come and gone in the other cities and come and gone with me in person that was as sincere as they could be, devoted a great deal of time, listened, and I've even had them take the opposite approach. They would want to send word back to me, or when they'd finally leave, make some comment like, well, he was too overbearing, which is not it. I know what they were trying to get at. If I was going to use their terms or to straighten it out, it's because I'm not even sufficiently overbearing. Which they meant more than that, because what they're actually meaning was, you didn't tell me enough to do. True, but it's even more than that, is you didn't tell me enough. That's not true. It's that I did not tell you enough that seemed to fit the categories, the structure that I mentioned to you, that is absolutely necessary to hold anything like this together under ordinary conditions. I'll grant you this, look around the people left here in other cities, that you're even still here is extraordinary, by the way. In fact, if you're interested, assuming there's a sort of a special mystical section in paradise in the next life, and that you guys end up there, you're going to have some stories to tell, trust me. And you go over there to all the other people that's gone through, they're going to find some of the things that you'll be saying about how you ended up there, and they're going to say, well, you know, what kind of methods is this and that? And you try to tell them something of what you've been through here, you're going to be like the life of that whole section for a while. That they're going to be following you around and say, come on now, you're holding back. It had to be more than that. You'll see. You'll see. If nothing else, you'll be the life of the party for a while. You'll be everyone's sort of the focal of attention there at the mystical section of paradise, because they're not going to believe it. That is, assuming any of you make it. Hold out. You see, a real mystic, back to part of it, and it's not just me, remember. I'm not just saying I'm the only person that's ever done this to another group of people. The only reason I'm bringing it up is because of you, not because of me. Because I'm not in any particular position. I'm not here. It's because of the position you're in because of me. But lacking what I pointed out that normally holds a group together, a mystical group especially, there has to be some sort of reverence. And I'm not saying nobody goes around insulting me, but you do see that it could hardly be further removed from any sort of thing of me encouraging, at least, any sort of special attitude toward me. And that's not from some sham humility. It's a waste of time at best, and at worst, it helped reinforce a feeling of separateness to life. And so if you don't have that, what are you left with? You apparently then would be left with the ideas. But then the ideas seem to not, there's no system to it. They're not codified, as they say in the law. There is no doctrine, which has to be. The aim, I just pull out everybody else's aim. I'll say, well, they used to call it enlightening, they call it awakening, and I pull out stuff, and then I'll mention it for a while, now I don't mention it for a while. Now I apparently mention one other, and sometimes you may think I'm playing dumb or don't know better. I'll pull out terms I know are being used, or I know some that some of you know have been used, and I'll pull out some that I know some of the people either here or in other cities have tried and then found distasteful or rejected, and here it is, I pulled it back out. And I call it this or that. And so there is no plainly stated aim. It's hard to feel guilty since I haven't given any specific things like, well, you must do so and so. So it's hard to feel guilty. There is almost no adhesion furnished by the leader, in this case me, to hold this together. Almost none. But see, a real mystic, the whole idea that I pointed out to you to start with, as strange as it may have seemed, I admit it was a loose description, but mystics ordinarily, those just basically had the same kind of wiring system as you did. That's what I mean by mystics ordinarily. That is an ordinary mystic, even though there is no such thing, is they need an audience. They want a following. Nobody's going to perform without an audience. You give it up. But a real mystic, not the ordinary kind, a real mystic is interested only in the adventure and not in followers, not in fame, not in money. You're interested in nothing but the adventure. And that puts a serious limitation, a serious, as Southern mystical followers would want to say, a serious crimp on how things seem to be progressing. Because you're not involved in any ritual. We're not worshiping me. We're not even paying me in particular respect. There is no doctrine. There are no specific tasks or rituals given so that you can attempt and fail, feel guilty. And that is not that casual. I don't mean, one more time, it's not a conspiracy, the way life works, for you to feel guilty. But if you do not have something to do and fail at it, why would you come back? But you've got nothing here to try and fail at. Even those who are wired up to want to pursue some sort of physical, mystical activity, you're almost destined to end up with someone teaching or talking about somebody else's journey, not their own, which I think it flew past everyone, or you used to me talking those kind of non sequiturs when I said there are two kinds actually of mystical systems in history, those you've heard of and those you haven't heard of. So you people now don't notice or seem to give no particular mind, but your mind should say, well, wait a minute, what the hell does that mean even if you're correct? Or, you know, how can that be proven? Because if I haven't heard of them, I hadn't heard of them, so how do I know there's two kinds? I know. Besides all the requirements for a mystical system, for a group of people to hold together, for people to feel as though there's some way to gauge their either progress or lack of progress, that there seems to be something holding it all together that seems to be a specific aim to it, with methods. Every one of those you've ever heard about, I don't care how intriguing it may have sounded, was whatever source. Let's say that someone right now is teaching some form of Zen, some form of Sufism, anything, with specific methods, no matter to whom they attribute it, specific methods, and some sort of doctrine with an aim that's described and a specific method or methods. It's simply a fact I'm telling you, they have not taken the journey. That's the justice of it. They are telling you somebody else's journey, and they will not hesitate to admit part of that. Again, I don't mean that they're holding back or that they're conspiring. If you said, well, wait a minute, haven't I heard this before somewhere? They'll either immediately admit it, or, it's no great difference, or one of their original selling points would be, I am here as, you know, if you really get kooky, to give you a wide range, somebody will say, I am here, I am Buddha reborn. Or of course, when I'm God, or I'm Jesus. But then they can go in advance before you ask. They say, I am here not just with some crackpot idea I made up. I am here because it has been revealed to me what Muhammad really meant in the Quran, that there was special secret instructions, and I in some way have gotten hold of them, or the spirits have talked to me, etc. It is a form of the Vadimekum defense again. It is always that the person is not simply standing there in front of you, this would-be mystical wolf that howls, and you show up, and he tells you some general idea. And he says, I'm thinking about starting a weekly meeting here, and I'll talk to you about such as this and give you the message and etc. Are there any questions? And people have many questions. And they're generally going to be, well, who are you? Where are you from? Get him to talk about I. And he will not normally hesitate. He will, in fact, want to admit. If they say, well, where did you get these ideas? Some of them sound a little familiar. Some of them sound strange. He will always refer to, either beforehand or when asked, to someone else's journey. Now, that's not the way you normally hear it, or people do, because it sounds as though it is a good foundation. It sounds as though perhaps that you are being saved, or it's evidence that you're not about to fall into the hands of some crackpot. If he says, now some of the things in the way I'm dressed, or the way I act, or the name I've assumed may sound a little strange to you, but I want you to understand that everything that I am teaching is based upon a great mystical tradition going back well over 4,000 years, and including such people as Zoroaster, Confucius, Buddha. And you think, well, okay. That's not real mysticism, because a real mystic is not going to tell you anything other than his adventure. What else can he tell you? Now, these other people are telling you their adventure. They're not lying, but what's been their adventure? Their adventure has been thinking and reading about other people's adventure. Do I have to repeat that? All ordinary mysticism feels as though, or for it to hold together, it has got to be a kind of doctrine, a kind of teaching, and it's got to be that the leader in some way is the source of the truth, or that he can reveal the truth that no one else presently knows. That the ordinary mind, to even hear of the truth, or those more mystically inclined, if you said the secret of life, or the great secret, the ordinary mind, without any hesitation, believes that it must come from the lips of some sage. It must come from somebody else, or why else would you be sitting listening to some mystic talk? It has to either come from there or some scripture, some revealed sacred scripture. The everyday mind cannot believe that the great secret exists in everyday life. It cannot. I would even submit to you, if those of you that like the little stories, how about all the ideas like the missing years of Jesus, they call it. That there he was, 12 years old, and gave him fits in the temple, and then suddenly shows back up at, there it was, 32, and all kinds of books and things written about it. Where did he go? Where did he get all this? Speculation that he traveled to Egypt or went to India. All that. And, well, even Buddha, it doesn't seem to be quite as inviting, but how about him? He went through the same thing, tried to do everything, like he went to the temple, raised hell, that is, he thought, this is not going to get it. But they don't call it missing years, they just say, just vaguely, he wandered around. Like for another 20 or 30 years, or 33 years, but they don't say that he was missing or he went off somewhere. Or Muhammad goes off by himself into a cave and comes out with all these great stories. Just an ordinary guy. I submit to you that's all based upon the same thing. It is the mind's refusal to see that this extraordinary information that these men got, they got from everyday life. But look how it fits. This Jesus, if you even got past the point of ordinary people believing, well, he was in some way a non-human. The missing years, that accounts for everything. I mean, even though you can't say exactly what, he went off somewhere and got secret information. Which, if that was true, then he is an ordinary mystic, because he simply told you the tale of somebody else's travel. But the reason that some of these men seem so extraordinary is they did not. Whether you can see it now after the fact or not, but at the time, they were saying something They were simply telling their own tale. They were telling their experiences and nobody else's. Is why it seems to be such a quantum jump, why it seems to be such a discrete break with the past. But then you go, well, where'd you come up with this? And he won't admit it. He won't say, well, okay. After the fact, if you recall, I pointed out to you that part of disciples' responsibility after the prophet's death, after the leader's death, is to make his life seem more interesting than it was. The missing years of Jesus. No telling what he did. No telling where he went, who he met up in the mountains of Tibet. They don't know where he went. That's a great story. Or Muhammad goes off in this cave, goes off by himself in the mountains and stays gone. They don't hear a word. He just goes up there and stays. He did it for a long time until he finally came out and says, all right, you people kept wondering, an angel, a supernatural force, came to me and has been talking to me for these many months or years. I'm going to tell you what it was. Doesn't that make sense? I mean, it's not a lot easier to ordinary minds, even those who want to believe in some secret knowledge or some supernatural understanding. Or Buddha, same thing. It just seems a little more prosaic that he went and studied with all the great mystical teachers, did everything he was supposed to, and one day went, nah, and just got up and wandered off. Except they didn't lose track of him. He didn't go off in a cave. They just say things like, well, for 33 years he wandered the forest of India. But still, look how vague. You don't know what he did. I'm going to tell you what he did. He lived life. Real mystics get all the information, all the secret, all the doctrine. They get the secret from everyday life. That's where it is. Does that make a very exciting sounding adventure? No, we don't have to wait. We don't have to wait and take a vote. No, it doesn't. Who would show up if it announced something to do with the attempt in modern day, contemporary times, to reach enlightenment, to reach a higher state of consciousness? And it did not entail some of what I mentioned. That there seems to be a charismatic leader, something that he is supposed to be worthy of respect, if not fear, deference, and that he offers a teaching, a doctrine, that he offers methods that cannot be routinely accomplished, rituals, so that you feel as though, well, that explains why I cannot reach the goal, the aim that he stated. If the enlightenment, if the secret, if the work is in everyday life, and someone knew it, I'm inferring now a real mystic, someone who had taken the trip themselves, and they're not telling you anybody else's trip, period, which I'm just pointing out, you've already put that together. I've never told you anybody else's experience. As part of us staying here and me doing these tapings, I almost hate to say it, but and it's not limited to this, but it's me trying to pull out all of these trips, all of these experiences that everyone else has talked about, and me using religions and other mystical histories. It's sort of trying to bring it so far out in the open as to make you see it for yourself. It's not that they didn't happen, it's not that they had no value, but it was not on the basis that people now normally believe, including would-be mystics. Would be mystical followers. You know, follower is not an insult also, by the way, because if you could do better than you're doing now, you wouldn't be sitting here listening to me. Now, that's just a fact. You might as well face it. It's not, which makes it a little bit harder, is because I do not push the relationship. I do not push the point that, yes, I know what you want to know. Yeah, I know. Therefore, I'm in a superior position as you. That is meaningful to ordinary people. It is helpful to ordinary people. It is comforting. They seek it. And it's almost lacking here. I know there's some or you wouldn't continue to be here. But notice this, you cannot pinpoint me intentionally doing it, even encouraging it. You almost have to read it in yourself. You almost have to force yourself to assume some attributes or characteristics to me that may or may not be true. Because that is a part of the adhesion to hold a group together. That's the kind of reverence I'm talking about. There's almost nothing to say past the point, if you ever understand, or past the point that I just said, that the secret the method is in everyday life. This is not anything I discovered, but it's people cannot hear it. And the mind tells you, it's not because you're deluded, but your mind tells you and anyone's mind tells you that if there is something to be known, if there is some validity to the idea of a great secret or the truth, you ask yourself, in all sincerity and sanity to start with, do I know what it is? And you think, no, I don't. You try to read, you try to do this and that, and then you hear it reputed, or you suspect it, or some guy stands up and says, I know. And I'm willing to share it with the appropriate people, those deserving of it. But the only thing they can tell you is about somebody else's adventure. Because if they have had the experience, if they have taken the trip themselves, they know that there's nothing specific to tell you in the sense of what you want to hear. Because what you want to hear, I've already described. You want to hear from them, whether you nowadays believe it or not, you want to hear him say, well, I know it and you don't. And I know how to do it. I know all the stories. I know all the great secrets. I know the method. And he doesn't. It sounds probably to some of your ears by now strangely self-evident, but anybody that tells you that there is a specific method, that there is a specific way, that there is a specific piece of information that you must discover, they have never taken the trip. They are telling you somebody else's adventure. And it may be very satisfying. It may be very interesting, which is what holds publicly recognized mystical systems together. Is it is quite entertaining. At the very least, it's more entertaining than movies and television and most literature, if you're wired up for that. If you're wired up for it, it is much more interesting to sit down and just start reading the Buddhist scripture. Everything's been remembered. To spend the rest of your life reading that to a would-be mystic is much more interesting. It's not even comparable between that and all the classical literature of the world. That it just strikes you that yes. And you think that surely within there, that or the Sufi literature or the writings of the Christian and Jewish mystic, that the secret is in there. The mind says it must be, and it's not. The everyday mind cannot see that the secret is in the everyday life of man. Which, one more time, I'll point out to you, as far removed as it may seem at times when you're in a real mechanical, mystical turn of mind, that I'm apparently talking about history or sociology or music or just everyday life. But that's where it is. But you can end up, which the reason I'm doing this, I can say it's sort of reached one of those other turning points again. I got people who've been hanging on to this by their fingernails for years and years, and people slip off, and I have them slip away. I think, I just can't, I don't know where this is going. That in itself is almost relief to ordinary minds, because then they're almost part then of a mystical system that they can let go. I don't mean it amounts to anything, but it's a feeling as though, well, at least I've separated myself from that which is not feeding me. Any form of separation, for those of you who can try to put this together with what I was telling you as another way to look at the attempt at the mystical experience, but any separation from everyday life is the antithesis of the mystical experience. To believe, as comforting, as interesting as it would seem, to think, to be able to say, all right, I am now a Sufi, I am now a Hindu, or I am now something a little more obscure, whatever it is. I am now a follower of the Yogi Bandi. I'm just making it up, and they call them Bandiites or something. If you could at least say to yourself or to the others here, well, we're now Bandiites. And there's something to distinguish us from non-Bandiites. That's not the problem. To a real mystic, the problem is you now feel that there's something to distinguish between you and everyday life. And as long as you feel there's a distinction between you and everyday life, that in some way you're privileged, in some way that you are strange, in some way you feel in extraordinary ways ordinary people do not feel, that in some way you hurt in extraordinary ways, that all fits into the common concept of the mystical. I know that. You know that I'm in some way hurt. The burdens of the world seem to fall upon me. I feel deeper than ordinary shade tree mechanics and drunks and plumbers and just ordinary people. And it passes for being spiritual. It passes for being, well, spiritual. That would be the highest compliment to people like that. And it's not. Even if I could do it, well, first I'll say it is hard to take everyday life wherein lies the great secret, wherein lies the moment of enlightenment, and make the everyday mind see it. That is being charitable. That is extremely difficult. Last part, if I could do it, I wouldn't do it. If I could do it for you. I can't, but if I could do it for you, I wouldn't do it for you. Because you wouldn't deserve it. Nothing would happen. As long as you think that the great secret of the awakening, which the mind will do, is one reason I keep pushing the three-dimensional reality run by binary forces, but as long as you think, as you must, with the everyday mind, that the awakening is somewhere down the road. Maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, but it's obviously not right now, right? There is no such thing as the awakening. It's right here. And that's almost a two-word, that's got to be, I guess, the world's shortest non sequitur. It's here. And people go, oh, come on. Well, if it's not here, where is it? It's nowhere. But you know now why you never hear of real mystical systems. You'll never hear of me and you after we're gone. People that's been watching this in other cities, or people that's been hanging around or read some of my writings, right now they may think, God, I like that. Or the best version being people now that approach me on the street that's seen it, I've told you before, but they're almost in the same position as you, some of them, is they don't talk to me. They have no real comment. They just go, ah, and they'll say things like, I'd like to shake your hand. And I'll wait, smile. They got no comment. They're almost good followers, in quotation marks. They have no comment. They don't say, I enjoy it. They don't go, I disagree, or some of that, they just say, God, and what they're saying is. But when you show up, when you hang around, it's like you devote a large part of your life to whatever I'm doing. And right now, if somebody jumped out of the bushes and grabbed you and went, what the hell is this? Why do you keep going over there? What do you do? What's the rituals, or what's the... And you go, well. The native glue that holds everything together from political parties to mystical systems is almost lacking here. For very good reason. And it's just a running ballet of just enough to hold it together, and just barely enough that some of you think, well, maybe I heard something and maybe I didn't. I just talk to you X number of minutes a week, and life talks to you constantly. And life is not like the mystical experience. Life is not somewhere down the road. No matter how close to some of you think, well, the mystical experience, I mean, hell, I've devoted 10 or 20 years to this. It's got to be coming up any day now. Is life coming up any day now? Is that it? It's simply a matter of coasting through life. But if it's a thing that you've got to make some effort that separates you from everyday life, that you're waiting for the mystical trick, it will never show up. And you understand, I've done you a favor, as annoying as it seems, by not even giving you much more than saying, well, you've got to hold your attention. You've got to be able to sort of be mindful. I know you can make a lot out of that, or you could even say, well, wait a minute, you're just talking about so-and-so. I know how many different words can I make up and turn. but I don't beat you over the head with it. But you have got to be making some effort. But if the effort, if you're still based upon your mind believing that the effort is to separate you from life, no. And again, I just keep skating around. You didn't ask me to, but you showed up with me now. And I know what I'm doing, and I'm not telling you somebody else's method, because if I told you somebody else's trip, at the ordinary level, all of you would have felt much better. We would have thousands, we'd have hundreds of people here now. Many of the people who have been here or were here for a long time would still be here. If I'd told you, even if I'd said it was me, which ordinary mystical, would-be mystical leaders do, they always say, well, yes, of course I know what's going on. Yes, I'm enlightened. Yes, I'm man number 17 up a scale of whatever measurements, or they try to identify with some other system, and they say, but yes, I know all about it. And they do not. If they say that, they're going to tell you somebody else's trip, and it can be interesting. And it does seem as though you then have some way to measure. That they will say, well, here's what we must do. Here's what you must do. And they will give you what they have read of somebody else's trip, not their own. And it is not conspiracy, because the world is full of people who, that's all they want. That's all they enjoy. But if he tells you specific methods, if he tells you specific aims and things to do that are not routinely possible, resulting in guilt, he has not taken the trip. He is telling you somebody else's trip. He may be charismatic enough that he can't play guitar, he can't dance, so he ended up being a mystic. And you're his audience. But he's never done it. He is simply telling you somebody else's trip. That's the only possibilities. And it's true outside the world of mysticism, but I'm pointing out to you that in an area that seems to be of